My husband and I went bankrupt, and all our relatives turned their backs on us. Only Aunt Betty, with her life savings of $45,000, reached out and saved us. 6 years later, we deliberately pretended to be poor and returned to his hometown. And what my aunt had been subjected to left me in utter shock. It was an early morning in early April in Chicago. A spring rain was blurring the glass windows of our high-rise office overlooking the Loop. In the long line of cars snaking through the city, the sound of horns echoed intermittently through the light fog. On this seemingly ordinary early spring morning, no one could have known that my life was about to be completely overturned by a few numbers on a computer monitor. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I was 39 at the time. I had been married to my husband, Mark Jenkins, for 13 years, but we had no children. Part of it was my health, but mostly it was because in our early days of marriage, we both threw ourselves entirely into our work, promising we would have kids once we were financially stable. Mark would often say to me, "It would be great to have the sound of a child's laughter in the house, but a couple needs loyalty to last. Children are a gift from above, you can't force it." With a quiet demeanor and sun-tanned skin, he was a boots, on-the-ground guy who spent his days roaming produce farms. If you put a freshly picked apple in his hand, he could instantly and accurately gauge its sweetness and freshness. I, on the other hand, handled finance, HR, contracts, and banking. Our company was named Apex Harvest, with a corporate office in Chicago and a packing plant in the Illinois suburbs. Approaching 10 years in business, our company had grown to include a fleet of refrigerated box trucks, a primary processing warehouse, a packing plant, and 67 employees. When business was booming, my husband's family welcomed us with open arms. His Uncle Bob would pat Mark on the back and say, "You're the only one in this family worth his salt, Mark. When big family matters come up, we'll be leaning on you too." Aunt Linda, his wife, would smile brightly whenever I brought gifts. "Our Sarah is such a blessing. Ever since you married into this family, even the holiday dinners have upgraded." Uncle Bob's son, my cousin Tyler, would often throw in pointed jokes. "Hey, when you open another branch, let me in as a shareholder. It's a waste to let money leak out to people outside the family." I just laughed it off. I thought it was natural for family to take care of each other, firmly believing the old saying that blood is thicker than water. I never dreamed a day would come when I would have to weigh those words with my own hands. The third founding member who helped build Apex Harvest was David Miller. David was the same age as Mark, a friend from their trade school days. In the early days when we lacked capital, the three of us would eat cheap takeout in the warehouse, taking turns sleeping next to fruit crates to guard against thieves. Once, I suggested to Mark that we introduce a two-step approval process. David had sole authority over export document processing and bank transactions up to a certain limit, but Mark cut me off immediately. "David has been with us since we had nothing. If we get too strict, he'll feel hurt and think we don't trust him." I still wasn't at ease. Trusting someone and removing control systems are two different things. Mark just smiled and refilled my coffee. "Since you handle the finances, everything in the world looks like a risk to you. I'll talk to David nicely." Swept up in our busy workload, that conversation faded into nothing. In early April of that year, Mark flew down to Fresno, California, to check citrus farms for a massive export contract. I had just recovered from collapsing due to overwork, and the doctor warned me to rest for at least a week. But because there was a payroll ledger to approve before lunch, I went to the office early. As soon as I turned on my computer, I discovered that 4 wire transfers had been approved over the past 3 days. The total was exactly $451,600. The money had been transferred to 4 shell companies I had never heard of. I urgently called in our manager, Brenda. "Brenda, what on earth are these 4 expense authorizations?" Brenda looked at the monitor and flinched. "I thought you approved them, Sarah." David said it was the deposit and agricultural inspection fees for the new packaging contract. I never received any such contract. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the ledger. "He said you were on sick leave and gave verbal approval first." A chill ran down my spine. "Are there any more pending transactions?" "2 more. Totaling 200. Null." I shot out of my seat. "Block all of David's account access right this second. Call the bank and put a stop payment on those 2 transactions immediately. Do not waste a single minute." While Brenda ran out, I called David. It rang and rang, but no one answered. The second time I called, his phone was turned off. I headed straight to his office. His chair was still turned as if it retained his warmth, and a cold cup of coffee sat on his desk, but his file folders were chillingly empty. The filing cabinet, which should have been packed, had only a few empty folders rolling around. I opened the auxiliary safe, the company's master's. Right then, the phone on his desk rang. It was our company representative dispatched to the port of Long Beach. "Sarah, you need to get to Long Beach right now. All 7 of Apex Harvest's containers have been detained." I gripped the receiver tight. For what reason? They found evidence that the inspection certificates were forged, and the authentication codes don't exist in the system. "Are these the documents your side processed?" A beat of silence flowed over the receiver before the rep answered. I checked 3 times. "If it's confirmed the documents are forged, the buyers will cancel the contract and sue us for massive penalty fees." My knees gave out, and I nearly collapsed. Outside in the hallway, I could hear employees laughing and chatting about whether to get tacos or burgers for lunch. No one knew the company was shattering into pieces from the inside. I called Mark. I could hear the wind blowing across the farm. "Hey, Sarah." "Mark, get on a plane to Chicago right now." Hearing the tension in my voice, Mark reacted instantly. "What's wrong?" "7 containers are tied up at Long Beach. Over $450,000 was drained from the company accounts, and I just blocked another $200,000 from going out." David turned off his phone and vanished. "The banking tokens and original documents are all gone." A heavy silence flowed over the line. After a long while, Mark asked, "Are you sure?" I stared at David's empty chair and replied, "I wish I were mistaken, but all of this couldn't happen by coincidence in a single morning." Mark lowered his voice. "Lock David's door, and don't go anywhere alone. I'm taking the earliest flight." Walking over to the window, the cars down in the loop were tangled in the rain as if nothing had happened. David's coffee on the desk was ice cold. The empty chair facing away from me proved he hadn't been gone long. For the first time, I realized, with bone-deep clarity, the most terrifying doors aren't broken from the outside, but are unlocked from the inside by the key of trust. It was nearly 11 p.m. when the last flight from California landed at O'Hare. I stood outside the breezy gate, rubbing my freezing hands. The moment Mark walked out, he pushed his suitcase aside and stared intently at my face. "Did you contact the port?" "No. They told us to show up in person tomorrow morning with the original documents. David's phone is dead. His house is empty, and I blocked the 2 transfers that were about to go out. He didn't ask any more questions." He gripped his bag strapped tightly, veins bulging on the back of his hand. We took a taxi straight to the office. The accounting department's lights were still on. Brenda and 2 employees were buried under mountains of receipts and ledgers. Mark took off his jacket and sat down. "Where did it go wrong?" I placed the 4 expense authorizations in front of him. $451,600 drained out over 3 days. David split it up to avoid triggering the bank's abnormal transaction detection limit. Brenda added, "David knew your electronic signature and secondary passwords, Mark. We have no idea how he got them." Mark flipped to the last page of the contract and slammed his fist on the desk. "This isn't my signature." Looking closely, the handwriting was about 80% similar, but the finishing angle of the strokes was subtly different. He took the master tokens too. Silence enveloped the office. Mark stood up and opened David's drawers. "That bastard didn't prepare this in a day or 2. At 1 a.m., accompanied by the police, we went to David's house in the wealthy suburbs. The landlord opened the door with a spare key. The closets were completely empty, and not a single children's toy remained. The only things rolling around in the trash can were torn pieces of airline tickets. The police officer pieced them together and said, "The whole family left the country 2 days ago. They flew to Cancun, Mexico, and likely transferred to another country from there." Mark stood in the middle of the living room, staring blankly at the 4 nail holes left on the wall where David's family portrait used to hang. After working side by side and sharing life's ups and downs for 10 years, all that was left were 4 nails in a wall. I knew he was far more heartbroken about losing a friend he believed was bound by loyalty than about losing the money. David hadn't just stolen the company's assets, he had robbed Mark of 10 years of memories and youth. I placed my hand on my husband's shoulder. "It's okay to hurt. But tomorrow morning, 67 employees looking only at us will come to work. We have to keep our heads straight right now." Mark squeezed his eyes shut, opened them, and nodded. At 6 a.m., we arrived at the cargo terminals. 7 containers bearing the Apex Harvest name stood stopped behind a restricted area like massive chunks of iron, as if choking our company's windpipe. The customs officer handed us the results. The inspection code on the documents does not exist in the system. The quality certifications are forged, too. We checked the inside, and it's mixed with substandard items completely different from the specifications. The representative for the Japanese buyer called me immediately. Sarah, we are halting all transactions. If you cannot provide a clear explanation within 48 hours, the contract will be terminated, and we will sue for penalty fees and damages. I tried to remain calm. We are currently cooperating with the police on an investigation. It is suspected to be embezzlement and fraud by an internal employee. That is your company's problem. We are proceeding exactly according to the contract clauses. The call disconnected. I stood next to Mark, whose eyes were bloodshot from staying up all night. Is there any way to save those goods? I shook my head. The documents are forged. We can't force the export. If we take one wrong step here, we go from being victims to accomplices. He stared at the 7 containers for a long time before turning his head away. That afternoon, a notice of account freezing and collateral asset seizure arrived from our primary bank. By late afternoon, the buyer officially canceled the contract. Packaging suppliers, orchard owners, and freight truck drivers all called simultaneously. Sarah, when are you going to pay last month's invoices? We are currently assessing the situation. We will let you know the schedule as soon as things are sorted. Don't give me empty words. We took out loans to farm too. When one call ended, another began. 3 days later, we sat down with our accountant, bank representative, and lawyer to clear all debts. The final amount, including loans, interest, taxes, penalties, outstanding accounts, and port logistics fees, reached nearly $1.5 million. After a long silence, Mark finally opened his mouth. Should we just file for bankruptcy and let the law handle it? I asked. Then what about the employees' salaries this month? It's all tied up in the frozen accounts. 67 families are waiting for that money. If we lose our house, we can live in a rental, but those people have medical bills and kids' tuitions on the line right now. Mark buried his head and clenched his fists. Then what about our house? Where are you going to stay? I'll stay wherever we end up. He looked at me for a long time and nodded. Okay, let's sell everything. After that, I don't remember getting a single proper night's sleep. We sold the house in a fire sale, and Mark's car went to a used car lot for pennies because we needed cash urgently. The refrigerated trucks, processing warehouse, packing line machinery, and even the factory land were successively seized and auctioned off. On the final payday, 67 employees lined up in the factory yard. Some received their pay envelopes, some signed receipts. Some just stared blankly at the company sign, unable to believe the workplace they had spent years at was closing its doors. The oldest machinery foreman shook Mark's hand warmly. It's a damn shame about the company, but thank you both for taking responsibility for the employees' wages until the very end. At least you can live with your heads held high. A young female employee holding her child teared up. I thought we were going to lose all our pay this month. Thanks to you, you pay for our hospital bills. By the end of July, the corporate liquidation process was complete. We had paid off all major debts, but we didn't have a single penny left to our names. On the afternoon we vacated the factory, we handed the front gate keys to the bank liquidator. A red foreclosure notice was pasted on the door. I stood by the side of the road wearing an old coat, hugging a bag stuffed with clothes. The money left in our wallets totaled barely $100. Mark slumped down on the cement steps in front of the gate. I thought if I just worked hard, no one could take what was mine. I sat next to him. People took our property, but they couldn't take our hands, feet, and brains. He smiled bitterly. Where do we go now? Looking down the endless highway through the rain, I thought of my husband's relatives, who would raise a glass with us every holiday and boldly declare that true family helps each other in tough times. I took my husband's hand. Let's go to your hometown in Ohio. We won't ask for a free meal, just a small loan to use until we find a room and jobs. Mark looked at me with a mix of guilt and a sliver of hope. Behind us, the heavy iron gates closed with a cold clang. I still believed that the people to whom we were never stingy when we had money wouldn't turn their backs on us when we fell. The Greyhound bus, leaving Chicago, departed before dawn. Outside the window, the fog-covered roads rapidly receded. I held a cloth bag on my lap, and Mark sat next to me, stiff, with his hands tightly clasped. He hardly spoke the entire way down to Ohio. I knew he wasn't afraid of starting over from the bottom. What he feared was the reality of standing empty-handed in front of the relatives who had once placed him on a pedestal. I gently placed my hand over his. Don't worry too much. We'll write a proper IOU and borrow it. Once we settle down, we'll pay it back with interest. Mark gave a faint smile. I'm afraid the way they look at you will change. I married you. I didn't marry the look in their eyes. I squeezed his hand tight. It didn't make the worries disappear, but his stiff shoulders seemed to relax a little. The bus arrived at the entrance of the Ohio town around 10 a.m. Late August heat had arrived, and the wind smelled of earth. Uncle Bob's house was at the entrance of the town. It was a freshly painted, 3-story colonial house, and the front gate had been upgraded to an imposing iron fence. The driveway was paved with stone, and building materials were piled on one side. Cousin Tyler's brand-new F-150 truck was parked at an angle in front of the door. I looked at Mark. Let's go in. He took a deep breath. Okay. Aunt Linda was prepping vegetables under the porch when she spotted us walking through the gate. She stopped her hands. Her gaze traveled from Mark's worn cloth bag down to my dirt-stained shoes. Oh my, when did you two get down here? Mark took off his hat and nodded respectfully. We just got off the bus. We came to see you and Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob walked out of the living room. In the past, whenever we visited, he would laugh heartily and shout for his wife to bring out coffee. But that day, Uncle Bob stood leaning against the doorframe. I heard something happened to the company. Yes. We liquidated all remaining assets to settle our debts and pay the employees' salaries. Uncle Bob frowned. So you're saying you're flat broke? Yes, we have nothing right now, but we don't owe any banks or vendors. Aunt Linda set her vegetable basket down on the floor. So what brings you all the way here today? Mark looked at me, then opened his mouth toward them. Uncle Bob, could you possibly lend us $4,000 for just 6 months? We'll write an IOU and make absolutely sure to pay it back with interest. We just need it to rent a cheap apartment and look for jobs right now. A heavy silence suddenly fell over the yard. Uncle Bob glanced at his wife, and Aunt Linda dusted off her apron and stood up. Things are tight for us lately, too. All our money is tied up in Tyler's business, so we don't have cash flowing. Mark remained polite. If $4,000 is too much, even $2,000 would be a lifesaver. Uncle Bob cleared his throat. Mark, business is about knowing your limits, ruining a perfectly good company overnight. You obviously pushed for contracts you couldn't handle, and it blew up from poor management, right? It was my fault for trusting the wrong person. Misjudging people is just a lack of your own ability. Mark clamped his mouth shut. Uncle Bob continued. Since your parents passed away early, you didn't get a proper upbringing, which is why you're so reckless. Would a guy raised right just hand over the company's master tokens to an outsider? I saw Mark's fists clench until his knuckles turned white. Uncle Bob was Mark's father's older brother. Because of that, his words pierced deeper and more painfully than any other criticism. I couldn't hold back, and stepped forward. Uncle Bob, making a mistake in business was our fault, but bringing up Mark's late parents to hurt him, isn't that crossing a line? Aunt Linda's face turned red, and she yelled, Who do you think you are, coming into this house and lecturing your elders? It's not a lecture, I'm telling you that you crossed a line. Just then, Cousin Tyler came down the stairs holding his phone. I've been listening to this whole thing. You guys are just here to beg for cash, right? Mark answered. Yeah, if you can help, I'd be grateful. If not, it is what it is. Tyler pulled up a chair, sat down, and snorted. Just because you chipped in a few bucks when we remodeled our house back in the day, you think you can act all high and mighty now? I looked Tyler straight in the eye. We never brought up the past. You must have felt guilty to bring it up first, right? Aunt Linda cut in. When you were making good money, the allowance you gave us was voluntary. Don't try to use that as an excuse to drain our assets now. Mark jumped up. Aunt Linda, we never said you owed us. We just thought that as family, we could lean on each other when times got tough. Uncle Bob slammed his hand on the armrest. What family? In front of money, family are just strangers. Why are you trying to dump your failed business on us? Don't bring your bad luck here. Get out. Tyler leaned back and sneered. I guess working manual labor is too embarrassing for a big-shot CEO. Why don't you go deliver food? I hear anyone who can breathe can make money doing that these days. I stood up. I understand perfectly what you mean. We'll be leaving now. Aunt Linda grabbed a broom from under the porch and aggressively swept the dust out the gate toward the street. The dirt flew right into my pant legs, broke losers showing up first thing in the morning. I need to sweep out the bad luck so it doesn't rub off on Tyler's business. Mark's face flushed bright red, and he stepped forward. I grabbed his wrist hard. Hold it in. Mark. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes. I shook my head. The longer we stand here, the more they'll delude themselves into thinking we're begging. I gave a slight nod. Excuse us. Tyler yelled at our backs. Go work a construction site. Did you think the whole world would worship you just because you used to sit under the AC? The gate slammed shut behind us. It was a cold, dry, metallic sound. 2 streets down, Mark's younger uncle, whose medical bills Mark had paid for in the past, had his wife tell us he wasn't home, shutting the door in our faces. We could clearly see his shadow watching TV through the window. The third relative's house didn't even open the door. A woman's voice just yelled from inside. We don't have money. Don't even ask. We hadn't even said who we were. The fourth relative cracked the door open, said they had a family emergency, and slammed it shut immediately. Not a single person asked if we had eaten or if we had a place to sleep tonight. Suddenly, a downpour started. We ran under the empty gazebo by the town's entrance. The wind and rain blew in, completely soaking one of Mark's shoulders. He dropped his head. I'm sorry. I dragged you here just to be humiliated. I took out a tissue and wiped the cold rainwater from his forehead. Asking for a loan when you're struggling isn't something to be ashamed of. Those people who took our generosity and wiped their hands clean of us are the ones who should be ashamed. Mark's voice cracked. I thought blood was thicker than water. I looked out at the long line of tightly shut gates. The blood might be the same, but their hearts sure aren't. He asked, what do we do now? My mind went to an old, run-down farmhouse in rural West Virginia. A house where they had to set up buckets in the living room every rainy season because the roof leaked. Where my hunched-over father farmed and my mother tended a vegetable patch and raised chickens. I hadn't wanted to be a burden on my parents, which was why we visited his wealthy family first. But right now, we had no other options. I took my husband's hand. Let's go to my mom and dad's house. For the first time since setting foot in Ohio, he didn't object. He squeezed my hand tight. He seemed to realize that the poorest house might be the only one to open its doors to us. By the time we boarded the Greyhound bus from Ohio to West Virginia, the sun was already setting. The rain battered the windows, leaving long silver streaks. I sat huddled against the glass, my bag by my feet. Mark leaned his head against the seat, silently watching the darkening fields blur by. After a long while, he spoke. Should we just get off halfway and grab a cheap motel room? I turned to him. How much is left in your wallet? Less than $100. Between bus fare, a room, and food, we'd last a day or two. He sighed. I just don't want to put a burden on your parents. I placed my hand over his. We aren't going to my parents to ask for money. We're going because tonight, we need a place where we won't get rained on. And a warm meal. Let's think about tomorrow. Tomorrow. He turned his gaze out the window. I'm afraid your dad will look at me and be disappointed. You know my family is poor, but my parents aren't the type to judge a person by the thickness of their wallet. We transferred to a local bus from the main terminal. By the time we reached the dirt road to their property, it was already pitch dark. The gravel road gleamed wetly, and the trees swayed in the wind. My mother was sitting under the porch, snapping green beans. As soon as she saw us walking through the gate, covered in mud, she dropped her basket onto the dirt. Sarah, what on earth are you doing here at this time of night? Before I could answer, my mother ran out in her bare feet. Her eyes lingered on the only cloth bag Mark carried and my muddy sneakers. Her shock quickly morphed into deep worry. My father opened the screen door and walked out. With a back slightly hunched from years of farm work, he looked at his son-in-law, standing with his head bowed under the porch. He didn't even ask what happened to the company. He just grabbed a towel and handed it to Mark. Dry off first, Mark. It's pouring. You'll catch your death. Mark took the towel with both hands. I'm so sorry, Arthur. We just showed up completely out of the blue. My father waved him off. A child is coming to his own home. You just open the door and walk in. What's there to be sorry about? Those words made the bridge of my nose sting. The old house was exactly as it had been the last time we visited. The roof shingles were patched with plastic tarps in several places, and two large aluminum buckets sat in the corner of the living room catching rainwater. The old cabinet had chipped corners, but the tea set my mother had just wiped was gleaming. She rushed us to wash up with warm water immediately. While we did, she went out and butchered the prize hen she had been raising so carefully for eggs, boiling it down into a rich chicken stew with plenty of onions and carrots. Seeing her stoking the stove, I quickly tried to stop her. "Mom, let me do it. You were raising that hen for eggs." She swatted my hand away. "I can just buy eggs at the market tomorrow. My kids came through the storm. You think I'm gonna feed you weeds? Don't worry about our situation. Just go rest." Her voice was gentle but firm. Dinner was just chicken stew, some cornbread, and a few side dishes. But it was the first time since the company went bankrupt that Mark cleared 2 bowls of food. My mother kept tearing off drumsticks and chunks of meat and placing them on Mark's plate. "Eat up, Mark. Your face has sunken to half its size. How are you going to get your strength back and stand up again?" Mark, keeping his head low, replied, "Yes. Thank you, Martha." My father waited until we had almost finished eating before setting down his spoon. "All right, tell me. What happened at the company?" I poured out everything, from the day I discovered the strange wire transfers to the 7 containers being detained, and finally, the red foreclosure notice slapped on the factory doors. I didn't hide the fact that we only had $100 left to our name. When I mentioned how Uncle Bob had insulted Mark's dead parents to humiliate him, my mother's eyes reddened, and she thumped her chest. Even if they're blood brothers, how could he say such wicked things? My father didn't gossip about Uncle Bob. He just looked steadily at Mark and asked, "Did you make sure to pay your employees' wages?" "Yes," Mark answered. All 67 employees were paid without delay. Bank loans, penalty fees, taxes, and all major debts were cleared with the liquidated assets. My father nodded. "You lost your wealth, but you kept your human decency, so you haven't lost everything. You can always make money again, but once you lose trust and honor, it's damn near impossible to pick them back up." With that, my father went into his bedroom. A moment later, he came out holding a faded cloth pouch and placed it on the table. Inside were bundles of $20 and $50 bills tightly bound with rubber bands. It was $4,500. Money he had scrimped and saved his entire life to fix the roof before the heavy rains came. "Take this, you two." I freaked out and pushed the money back. "No, Dad. The roof leaks in more than one place. When it pours, the living room turns into a puddle. How can we take this?" My father pointed at the aluminum buckets catching rainwater. "If it leaks, we just put out another bucket. You can fix a hole in a house, but what do you use to patch a hole in a person's heart?" Just then, my mother took off 2 small gold rings from her fingers. It was the only jewelry my father had given her when they married. "If you pawn these, you should get a good $1,500. Add it to your father's money. That's $6,000. Use this to get a small rental and look for jobs." I grabbed my mother's hands and burst into tears. "Mom, you've never taken these off your whole life." "I won't take them." My mother patted the back of my hand. "Does having some gold wrapped around my fingers make my stomach full? My kids are about to end up on the streets. What good is holding on to this?" Mark stood up from his seat, walked over, and broke down, burying his face in his hands in front of my parents. "Arthur, Martha, you gave me your precious daughter, and I brought her back to you looking like this. I don't deserve to take this money." My father grabbed Mark's shoulder and pulled him into a hug. "I'm giving this to my children, not just for Sarah to use alone. As long as you call us Mom and Dad, we don't draw lines between your side of the family and ours when times are tough." Mark bit his lip hard, his eyes bloodshot. "I promise you, even if I have to work manual labor, I will never give up. I will stand back up and make up for every ounce of suffering Sarah has been through." My father poured more tea into his cup. "A married couple is like a pair of work boots. If you lose one, the other ain't much good for the road. If you're poor, you work together. If things are hard, you endure together. You don't blame and resent each other just because you have no money." That night, my parents gave us the thickest mattress in the bedroom and laid down a thin blanket on the living room floor for themselves. Listening to the rainwater dripping into the bucket, I rolled over. Mark was still lying with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He whispered softly, "I thought if I didn't have money, I had lost everything. But I learned for the first time today, In this old house without a single expensive thing in it, I feel like I've been saved. Under the thin blanket, I held his hand tightly. 2 days later, my mother packed a bag of rice, some dried jerky, roasted peanuts, and canned goods. My father firmly tied up 2 old cotton blankets, saying we needed to save money on bedding if we were going to find a cheap room down south in Atlanta. I clutched the envelope with my parents' $6,000 to my chest. It was heavier than any corporate briefcase I had ever carried in my life. Before heading to the bus terminal, my father stopped us at the gate. If you succeed, nothing could be better. But even if you fail, it's all right. So come back anytime. This house might be poor, but we will never lock our doors against our children. I kept my head bowed, unable to look my father in the eye for a long time. I felt like a waterfall of tears was going to spill out. We left West Virginia on a morning right after the rain stopped. In our hands were rice, old blankets, and the money my parents had traded for their collapsing roof. Engraved in my heart was a firm resolution. No matter how dark the road ahead, Mark and I would never let go of each other's hands. Before heading south to Atlanta, Mark was stubbornly determined to detour back to Ohio to pay respects at his parents' graves. If he just left without doing so, he felt like a prodigal son running away without saying goodbye. I understood. Even though his living relatives had given him deep scars, his parents' graves were the one sanctuary he couldn't bear to turn his back on. That morning, we left the rice and blankets at a friend's store in town, taking only our bags and a few simple flowers, and boarded the bus. When we reached the outskirts of his hometown, it was late afternoon. Gray clouds hung low, and the wind from the fields carried the smell of dirt and damp grass. The family cemetery where his grandparents and parents rested was at the back of town, along a narrow path on the family's legacy land. The main iron gates to the family estate were padlocked, but there was a small memorial stone near the fence where distant descendants could temporarily leave flowers. Mark laid down the flowers and bowed his head for a long time. Mom, Dad, don't worry. I didn't do anything to be ashamed of. I just fell down because I trusted the wrong person. When I leave this time, I swear I will build it all back with my own 2 hands. Standing beside him, I prayed silently. Please give us the strength to rely on each other and endure. Just as we finished, a sudden shower poured down. Cold raindrops battered us fiercely, so we quickly covered our bags with a plastic tarp and hurried toward the bus stop by the highway. When we were halfway down the alley, an urgent voice called out from behind. Mark, Sarah, is that you? Hold on a minute. Turning around through the rain, I saw a small, frail, middle-aged woman running toward us, waddling heavily under the weight of 2 massive insulated coolers strapped to her shoulders. One cooler was covered with clear plastic, and the other had a low plastic stool and a few food containers tied to it. The hem of her thin raincoat and her pants were covered in muddy water up to her ankles. It was Mark's Aunt Betty. Mark's father's family had 4 siblings, and Aunt Betty was the youngest. Having lost her husband 10 years ago and with no children, she had made her living since her youth selling breakfast burritos and hot dogs from a food cart outside the local high school. Aunt Betty set the coolers on the ground, gasping for rough breath, and stroked Mark's face. Lord Almighty, why does your face look as pale as a dead leaf? What's with all these bags? Where are you going? Mark bowed his head. We're heading down south to look for work, Aunt Betty. Aunt Betty looked at me once, then stared at the worn bag slung over Mark's shoulder. She didn't ask a million probing questions right there on the street. She just said, let's go to my place first. If you stand in the rain at the bus stop and get sick, how are you going to find a job? Aunt Betty's rented place was a tiny, run-down trailer at the edge of the town. She set her cooler down under the awning, turned on a portable gas stove, and boiled some hot water with a tea bag. Drink this, and warm your insides first. Inside the cooler were a few leftover foil-wrapped burritos. She opened a container, threw 2 leftover fried eggs and some sausage pieces onto a skillet to warm them, and piled them high on top of the burritos for us. I asked, aren't you going to eat with us, Aunt Betty? She waved her hand dismissively. I was picking at them all day while I was cooking. I'm sick of 'em. You 2 eat up. I knew that was a lie. She probably hadn't had a single proper bite to eat since morning. But the look in her eyes was so resolute I didn't dare refuse. Mark put a piece of burrito in his mouth, but his throat choked up and he couldn't swallow. He had grown up leaning on those rough, calloused hands. When his parents died, Aunt Betty was the one who handled the funeral. Whenever he was short on tuition, she was the one who would silently stuff crumpled bills into his jacket pocket and pretend she didn't know anything. When we told her the story, how the company collapsed, how we sold the apartment, how even the relatives slammed the doors in our faces, Aunt Betty didn't cry, and she didn't curse anyone. She just stared at the blue flame of the gas stove for a long time before speaking. People can build mansions for houses, but it doesn't mean their hearts are rich on the inside. When you had money, they called you blood. Now that you're flat broke, I guess that blood magically vanished. Mark said in a fading voice, "I'm just so sorry I dragged Sarah into this and made her suffer this humiliation." Aunt Betty looked at me. "Sarah, the fact that you stayed by Mark's side until now is incredible. It's easy for a woman to stay when her husband makes good money. Staying by his side when everything is ruined and you're flat broke, that is the real work." Aunt Betty pulled the empty cooler toward the corner of the room. Underneath a towel at the bottom, she pulled out a bundle tightly wrapped in layers of black plastic bags. Unwrapping it, she revealed an old, worn-out bank passbook. She pushed it in front of me. "There's $45,000 in here. You two take it." I couldn't believe my ears. "Excuse me? Aunt Betty, what did you just say?" "Take it as your seed money. Don't waste a dime of it. Go down south, find a room, and when you find a business worth trying, use it." Mark sprang up like a coiled spring. "Absolutely not. This is your retirement money. Aunt Betty." She opened the passbook. 30,000 of it I saved by waking up at 3 a.m. every single day for over 20 years to roll those burritos. 15,000 is the life insurance payout from when your uncle died. This was her entire life savings. Money she scrounged together to fix her leaky roof, to get surgery for her aching arthritis, and to use when she no longer had the strength to stand by her food cart. I pushed the passbook back toward her. "Aunt Betty, you don't have kids to take care of you. If we take this money, we're cutting your last lifeline." Aunt Betty frowned angrily. "I still got 2 hands that work, and I got my food cart. You two are the ones standing on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to step back." Mark sank onto the worn linoleum floor, completely broken. "You can hit me, Aunt Betty. You can curse me out, but I absolutely cannot take this money." Aunt Betty tried to forcefully pull Mark to his feet, but lacking the strength, she slammed her hand on the table and yelled, "You think acting all proud and falling to pieces is going to protect your manhood? If you act like this out in the cruel world, how are you ever going to accomplish anything?" Mark lifted his head. His eyes were completely bloodshot. Aunt Betty grabbed my hand and forced the passbook into it. "I'm giving you an opportunity, not throwing you pity. Later, when you succeed and you see someone in a tough spot, eagerly extend your hand to them. I'll consider my money paid back then." I looked at Aunt Betty's hands. They were brutalized by searing hot grills, knives, and the freezing morning wind, completely covered in thick calluses. This passbook in my hand wasn't just money. It was tens of thousands of burritos, countless 3 a.m. mornings when the rest of the town was asleep, and the raw embodiment of the retirement she had fiercely scraped together. Mark led Aunt Betty over to the framed photo of her late husband. We stood together. My husband swore an oath. "I swear to God, I will not waste a single penny of this. Even if I have to do manual labor, carry boxes, or sleep on the street, I will never lose your blood money." I added my voice. "We will definitely come back. We won't come back to show off how successful we are. We'll come back to make sure you never have to carry those coolers at 3 a.m. ever again." Aunt Betty turned her head away, trying to hide her tears, pretending to wipe down the counter. She let us sleep there that night. At dawn, she woke up early and packed us sandwiches, boiled eggs, and snacks for the long trip. As the bus pulled out, I looked out the window. Aunt Betty stood under the terminal awning. Her faded vest fluttered in the wind, and her 2 massive coolers, the companions of half her life, sat beside her. The poorest, most despised woman in the family had given us her entire life savings. In that moment, I swore to myself, failure was no longer an option for us. The Greyhound drove all night, and it wasn't until the next afternoon that it dropped us off at the Atlanta bus terminal. As soon as we stepped off, the thick, humid southern heat hit our faces. I held the cloth bag tight to my chest, and Mark stood in the middle of the pouring crowd, looking around as if trying to figure out where to begin. We headed not for downtown, but toward an industrial area near the Atlanta State Farmers Market. An old acquaintance of Mark's had recommended a tiny, 100-square-foot motel room renting by the week. It was a boiling box baking under the midsummer sun. We had to share a bathroom at the end of the hall, and the faucet only trickled. The landlord demanded a security deposit and 2 months' rent up front. I took exactly that amount out of the $6,000 my parents had given us. Then, I pulled out a new notebook and drew a line down the middle of a page, dividing it into 2 columns. Mark asked, "Writing the money separately?" "Yeah. The $6,000 my parents gave us will strictly be for rent, groceries, and absolute minimum living expenses. The $45,000 Aunt Betty gave us is pure business seed money. We can't touch it for anything else." He nodded. "I know. That money is 20 years of Aunt Betty's 3 a.m.s. 3 days later, we found a beat-up refrigerated box truck. The cargo bed was scratched all over, the driver's seat was torn with stuffing popping out, and the refrigeration unit kept turning on and off. Mark crawled under the truck and spent 30 minutes listening to the engine and checking for grease. The seller got annoyed. "Used trucks make a little noise. That's how it is. If you want it quiet like a new car, pay more." Mark wiped his hands and pulled me back. "The engine core is solid. Just need to change the timing belt, replace the 2 rear tires, and fix the compressor on the fridge. Truck price plus repairs will be around $15,000. I asked, "What are the odds this thing survives the road?" "Mechanical performance 70%. The other 30% relies on your desperate prayers that it doesn't die on the highway." I burst out laughing. "All right, let's buy the damn thing. But if it breaks down in the middle of nowhere, don't ask me to push." Mark grinned. "If you can push this rig, I'll serve you as my boss for the rest of my life." It was the first time we had laughed comfortably out loud since losing the company and leaving Chicago. After repairs, our operating capital was exactly $30,000. Mark drove me around the peach orchards in South Carolina and Georgia. He personally checked the condition of the peaches, apples, and melons, asking the farmers detailed questions about harvest times and drop rates. Meanwhile, I took the bus to the massive Atlanta State Farmers Market to find buyers. I visited the wholesalers one by one, pitching our product. Some waved me off after a few words. Others lowballed me to ridiculous prices just to test my reaction. Among them was Maria Ramirez, a tough woman in her 50s who ran one of the biggest stalls. She looked me up and down from over her register. "You got your own warehouse?" "Not yet. How many delivery trucks you run?" "1. You got fixed sourcing farms lined up?" "We are establishing them as we speak." Maria leaned back in her chair and sneered. "So, lady, you got absolutely nothing. What kind of guts do you have to supply me?" I answered confidently. "I have the confidence to bring you the real deal. I will keep appointment times like a razor. If it's grade B, I'll honestly tell you it's grade B. I'll only call grade A, grade A. I will never pull that trick where I mix the bad stuff under the good stuff in the box to fool your eyes." Maria stared at me silently for a few seconds, then pointed to the floor. "Bring me the goods. I'll sell 'em, and if they're any good, we'll talk." Our first haul was 2 tons of South Carolina peaches. Mark personally checked the condition of every single box in the field before loading them. I had verbal agreements with 2 stalls, and our truck arrived at the Atlanta market at 2 a.m. However, that night, a massive influx of out-of-state inventory flooded the market, and auction prices hit rock bottom. One stall owner shook his head. "Prices are crap this morning. Take this rate, or I can't take 'em. Unload 'em, or turn the truck around." Mark pulled me aside. "If we sell at this rate, we won't even cover gas. We break even." I watched condensation form on the peach boxes. "If we pack 'em up and leave, we just burn more gas, and they lose value. Dump half here. I'll try to find a buyer for the rest." From 2 a.m. until dawn, I roamed every corner of the wholesale market. Some tried to rip me off further. Others didn't even open the boxes. Luckily, at the very end, Maria Ramirez agreed to take the remaining volume conditionally. The catch was that we had to sort them by size and condition right then and there. We climbed into the back of the truck, covered in dust and peach fuzz, sweating buckets as we repacked the boxes. When we set the final box on the ground, the sky was already getting bright. I crouched on the passenger side floorboard and tallied the ledger. Net profit, barely $100. Mark handed me a bottle of water. "Worked our asses off for over a dozen hours to make just this. It's not a loss. The important thing is Maria Ramirez remembered our faces and our credit." From that day on, we ran the circuit between South Carolina, rural Georgia, and the Atlanta market like hamsters on a wheel. Mark drove, fixed the engine, and hauled the boxes. I called clients, wrote the ledgers, collected payments, and balanced the accounts down to the last penny. There were countless nights we didn't have time to go back to the motel, just reclining the seats in the truck to catch a few winks of sleep. Meals were always cheap roadside diners or gas station sandwiches. When we really needed to save money, we chewed on the dried jerky and roasted peanuts my mother had packed, washing it down with cold water. Late one night in September, the truck's engine suddenly died on a desolate shoulder of I-85. Rain poured down so hard you couldn't see in front of you. Mark put on his raincoat and crawled under the truck, telling me to stay in the cab. But I grabbed the tarp covering the back and crouched on the shoulder. "What do you need?" "Flashlight and a 5/8-inch wrench." When I handed him the wrong size wrench, Mark got annoyed. "You're so damn fast at math. How can you not tell the difference between wrench sizes?" I snapped back. "If you're so smart, grow a third arm and hold the flashlight yourself while you fix it." In the cold tension, Mark silently turned the wrench, and I stood getting drenched, holding the tarp down so it wouldn't blow away. It took nearly an hour before the engine sputtered back to life. We both got back in the cab but didn't say a word. When we reached a rest stop, I pulled out the bag of peanuts and divided it exactly in half. Mark took his share, chewed a few, and opened his mouth. "I'm sorry. I wasn't mad at you. I was just so terrified this piece of crap truck was gonna die, all the fruit would rot, and we'd blow Aunt Betty's money in one night." I looked at his rough hands, stained black with grease. "I'm sorry too. We lost our company, but let's not lose our hearts to each other just because we're poor." He placed his hand over mine. "Yeah. If we get mad from now on, let's not hold it in. Let's just say it immediately. Let's not hurt each other with our words." After that incident, Maria Ramirez started taking our stock regularly. "You two are always on time, and you never lie about your product. Doing business with you actually feels like doing business." Through her introductions, we secured accounts with 2 more mid-sized wholesalers. By late October, we leased an old, tin-roofed warehouse off the highway to stockpile inventory. On the first night, we loaded nearly 4 tons of premium table grapes into the warehouse. The sky opened up like a bucket. The water in the drainage ditch behind the warehouse surged instantly, spilling over the threshold. Mark shook me awake. "Sarah, get up. The warehouse is flooding." I jumped up. Muddy water was already up to my ankles, and the fruit boxes we had set on the floor were bobbing around in the dark, bumping into each other. That fruit represented half of our remaining capital. I immediately called the landlord and the guys I had befriended at the market, then rolled up my pants and jumped into the water. Mark threw down wooden planks and frantically hoisted the boxes onto the high shelves. I counted the inventory, pulling the dry boxes toward the truck. The sharp plastic corners scraped my calves, stinging them. The rain hammered the tin roof with a deafening roar, and the water kept rising. Mark yelled over the rain, "Load the grape boxes into the truck first. We have to save everything we can." Mark and I hugged the heavy boxes, gritting our teeth as we heaved them into the truck bed. The truck's headlights illuminated the yellow, muddy water. The boxes wobbled beneath our feet. We had made it this far on the blood, sweat, and tears of our parents and Aunt Betty. We couldn't just stand by and watch our only hope float away in the mud. When the water in the warehouse reached mid-calf, people started running in one by one. The motel landlord, a burly guy named Rick, barged in wearing a torn raincoat, splashing through the water. "Pull the weakest boxes first. Don't just stand there. Grab something." Behind him, neighbors from the motel and young guys we knew from the market ran in pulling pallet jacks they had borrowed from the factory next door. They didn't even ask how much we were paying them. They just looked at the sinking fruit boxes, rolled up their pants, and waded in. I stood in the center of the warehouse doors, shouting over the noise. "Grade A grapes go straight into the truck. Grade B apples go on the second tier of the metal racks. Throw the cardboard packaging onto the office desks. Do not let it touch the water." Mark and Rick laid down planks to make a makeshift path. Every time the pallet jack wheels got stuck in the mud, the men would shout, "1, 2, 3, and heave with their entire bodies. It wasn't until 4 a.m. that the vast majority of the at-risk inventory was safely loaded into the truck. While checking the ledger, I noticed 2 boxes were missing. "Mark, I can't find 2 boxes of grapes." Mark shined his flashlight toward a low corner. There, 2 boxes were wedged behind a pile of plastic crates, pushed there by the current. Mark tied a rope around his waist, handed the other end to Rick, and waded into the deep water. I grabbed his arm. "Wait till the water drops. If we wait, the fruit just gets mushy." The moment Mark pulled the first box out, his foot slipped on the slick cement. The loud splash made my heart drop. Rick and the guys holding the rope yanked hard, pulling him up. Mark was coughing, but he still had a death grip on the box handles. Once he got to safe ground, he panted, "They're fine, didn't lose a single box." I was so angry and terrified I smacked him on the shoulder. "If the fruit ruins, we buy more. If something happens to you, how am I supposed to pay Aunt Betty back?" Mark forced a grin. Okay. From now on, I'll get the CEO's approval before I go in." Everyone burst out laughing. That one joke in the middle of a flood melted the tight tension of the night. As morning broke and the rain weakened, the water slowly drained out of the warehouse. I gathered our cash and handed day wages to everyone who helped. A few took it awkwardly, but Rick firmly pushed my hand away. "Someone falls in the water, you pull him out. It's just what you do. Later, when you two make it big, if you see someone struggling, just do the same for them." Looking at the bills in my hand, I remembered what Aunt Betty had said. I thought the world was a cold, cruel place, but true kindness wasn't hiding behind massive, imposing gates. We arrived at the market 2 hours later than scheduled. I fully expected our contracts to be canceled. Maria Ramirez stood in front of her stall, looking at our truck covered in mud. "What happened at your warehouse last night?" I answered honestly. "The warehouse flooded. We were up all night moving inventory to higher ground, so we're late. Please inspect it thoroughly. I'll take back any waterlogged boxes or anything that's damaged." Maria wordlessly opened 5 boxes and checked the grapes. The fruit was firm and unblemished. She nodded. "You missed the time, but you didn't lie. I'll take it all. More than that, she personally called 3 other wholesale buddies. I got a couple here running produce. They don't cheat on quality, and they work honest. If you need bulk apples or grapes, I'll give you their number. Try 'em." People say there are no friends in business, but I realized then that a true friend in business isn't someone you drink with, it's someone you can trust with your money. After building that credit, I began to systematically tighten our entire operation. I documented the scale tickets, harvest dates, and grade A to grade B ratios from every orchard. I set strict credit limits for every buyer. Mark no longer bought goods on verbal promises, and I instituted a system requiring 2 signatures for any major expenses. We separated bank access into multiple layers of security, and I balanced the receipts against the ledger every single night. One night, Mark looked at the payment approval chart I drafted and laughed. "Aren't you strangling me a bit too tight? At this rate, I'll need to submit a proposal just to buy a pair of boots. Buying a pair of boots is fine, but if you want to buy the whole shoe store, you need my approval." He laughed out loud. "Well, at least you let me breathe." Exactly 9 months after we stepped into that tiny Atlanta motel, I sat in the cramped room, recounted the ledger 3 times, and still couldn't believe my eyes. After deducting the cost of the used truck, warehouse, rent, repairs, operating capital, and all outstanding debts, our account still had the exact $45,000 Aunt Betty had given us. Furthermore, we had accumulated our first real surplus of pure profit. That night, I called Aunt Betty. "Aunt Betty, we recovered all our seed money. I'm going to wire your money back to you tomorrow." After a brief silence, Aunt Betty asked, "Does making your money back mean if you both quit your jobs tomorrow, you'd still have enough to eat?" I laughed. "Oh, not quite that much, but we've stabilized enough to catch our breath." "Then it's not time to pay me back." I pressed the phone close and begged, "Let me at least send half of it back first." Aunt Betty yelled, "Half my foot? You survived 1 rainy season? And you think you got steel rods in your legs? Get hit by a few more storms, let those calluses really set in, and call me then." Knowing I couldn't break her stubbornness, we sent premium vitamins and a new smartphone via courier instead. I secretly slipped an envelope of cash under the pillboxes, but she found it like a ghost and mailed it right back. From that day on, we called her every Sunday night. She would tell us exactly how many burritos she sold that day, or complain about a high school kid who ran off without paying for his hot dog. Once, I asked, "Aunt Betty, aren't you exhausted?" She laughed. "If I'm tired, I sit down to sell. If I'm more tired, I close up for the day. I ain't so old yet that I need to lean on you to go to a nursing home." By the end of our 2nd year, we had 4 refrigerated trucks, a sizable, proper warehouse, and over 10 employees. Mark didn't have to load every box himself anymore, but he still personally inspected the shipments before the trucks left. The first thing I did once we had stable income was hire contractors to completely fix the roof of my parents' house in West Virginia. My father saw the invoice and called to scold me. "Didn't I tell you to hold on to your seed money and not spend it?" I replied. "This is me paying back the $6,000 you lent me. You said you wouldn't take cash, so I'm paying you back in new shingles." My father cleared his throat and chuckled. "Married off, and you still got an answer for everything." He allowed the roof, rewiring, and bathroom repairs, but strictly refused my offer to send living expenses. In our third year, a middle-aged man named Mr. Henderson visited our warehouse. He was the purchasing director for a major national fruit processing and beverage plant. He was looking for a vendor to supply raw goods reliably every month. He slid a partnership proposal across the desk. "Sarah, if your side can absolutely guarantee quality and delivery dates, I want to sign a long-term annual contract, not just order by order." I looked at Mark. He didn't say a word, but his eyes were shining. It was the moment a highway to a wider world opened up before us, not just a few boxes or a single truckload, for the first time since Apex Harvest had collapsed. But we didn't blindly sign on the dotted line. I asked Mr. Henderson for 3 days to review production data, logistics routes, and payment terms. Having fallen so hard once made me a strict stickler for the rules. I no longer believed in sweet talk and rosy promises. Over those 3 days, Mark toured the orchards, pulling projected monthly yields, and created a plan B for alternative sourcing in case hurricanes or floods wiped out the Georgia supply. 3 days later, we met Mr. Henderson with a densely packed business plan. He read it thoroughly and clicked his tongue in admiration. "Your company is still small. Is there really a need to overcomplicate things with a plan B and C?" I replied, "It's because we once dropped our guard and lost everything." Mark pointed to the yield graphs. "If the South Carolina supply falls through, we instantly activate our Michigan lines. I believe a long-term contract starts with building escape routes for both companies, even if a natural disaster hits." Mr. Henderson nodded. "Excellent. Let's start with a 1-year deal. If performance is good, we'll go exclusive for 3 years next year." That one contract didn't make us overnight millionaires, but our 4 trucks ran relentlessly on a fixed schedule, and our employees got paid exactly on time. Entering our 4th year, we expanded our sourcing across multiple states, like Florida, Michigan, Washington, and California. Mark knew the names of all the farmers, their families, and their major life events. I strictly handled cash flow, taxes, legal, and internal controls. I required 2 signatures to spend a single dollar, and banking access remained under multi-factor lockdown. Our biggest turning point came in September of our 4th year. We heard that a fruit drying and processing plant in Macon, Georgia, was facing bankruptcy. The previous owner had taken out massive loans to buy state-of-the-art equipment, but severely lacked management and sales skills. Defect rates skyrocketed, and the 60 factory workers hadn't been paid in 3 months. Mark toured the plant and said, "The machinery is excellent. The problem was how the people running it were managed." I looked at the 60 workers sitting despondently outside the cafeteria. "To buy this, we'll have to pull a massive loan from the bank too. If we don't, we'll spend our lives just as wholesale suppliers to someone else's factory." The experience of bankruptcy had made me a coward, but my intuition told me that if we didn't take this step, that fear would become a prison for the rest of my life. We hired appraisers to value the equipment, had an accounting firm audit the ledgers, and squeezed the bank to ascertain the exact debt load. After a month-long tug-of-war, we agreed to acquire the plant. Our number 1 non-negotiable condition was that the 3 months of back wages for the workers had to be prioritized in the acquisition funds. On day 1, I gathered the entire staff in the yard. "Everyone, I won't make empty promises that this factory will magically run perfectly starting tomorrow, but I will promise you these 3 things. First, your back pay and future wages will never be delayed by a single day. Second, do not hide or cover up defective products. The company will bear the cost of mistakes. Third, I will not lay off a single person who works diligently." A female line foreman in her 50s raised her hand. "What about the 3 months of pay we got stiffed on? It will be deposited in full into your accounts before you clock out this Friday." At 5 p.m. on Friday, the full back pay hit the workers' accounts. Mark immediately overhauled the quality sorting process and brought in an expert to rebuild the dryer ventilation systems. I terminated all the overpriced contracts the previous owner had set up with his cronies and cut out every source of embezzlement. However, I didn't touch a single dime of the workers' food allowances or benefits. For the first 3 months, the factory still bled money. Staring at the cash flow statements at 4 a.m., breaking into a cold sweat, the nightmare of the red foreclosure notice from Apex Harvest flashed before my eyes. Mark placed a cup of hot milk on my desk. "You're spooked again." "Of course I am. I'm terrified. My heart's beating out of my chest." "Then why did you sign the deal?" "Because even though it's scary, I'm not doing it blindfolded this time. I have control over it." By month 4, defect rates plummeted by half. That winter, we finally passed the notoriously strict standards for export to Japan and shipped our first batch of dried fruit. Mark stood for a long time, chest swelling, watching the trailer leave the factory gates. "When our containers were held up in Long Beach, I felt like I lost everything," he said. I replied, "This time, it's not forged documents. You're sending them out with real, genuine skill." Following Japan, we broke into major national supermarket chains and high-end grocery stores in the U.S. We rebranded the company as Apex Naturals. By the end of our 6th year, Apex Naturals was valued at roughly $15 million. We had become a rock-solid mid-sized enterprise with 230 full-time employees, 3 massive logistics warehouses, a state-of-the-art processing plant, and our own refrigerated logistics network. I took on the role of Chief Executive Officer, and Mark was the president. However, to Mark's relatives in Ohio, my parents in West Virginia, and Aunt Betty, we simply glossed over it, telling them we had paid off our debts and were stable enough not to starve. If you are reading this, have you ever seen relatives or acquaintances completely change their tune when someone goes totally broke? If you experienced that, would you forgive them? Or would you draw a line forever? Please, stay with my story until the end. Because behind this success story, a shocking event involving Aunt Betty tore at my heart for a long time. Over those 6 years, we secretly visited Ohio a few times to see Aunt Betty from afar, and we repeatedly begged her to move down south and live with us. But every time, she waved us off. "I like the smell of my own kitchen and my dirt roads. If I go to the shiny city, I'll suffocate and actually get sick," Mark pleaded. "We're not asking you to sit in a back room like an old relic. Come live with us, please." Aunt Betty laughed. "You two are busy enough with your company. If I go there, what am I gonna do? Be your maid? Forget it. I'm gonna keep selling hot dogs to the high school kids." We consistently sent her premium health supplements and vitamins, and we never missed our Sunday night calls. Our last phone call with Aunt Betty was on a Sunday evening in early March. "Aunt Betty, how are your knees feeling lately? When you get old, it is what it is. The joints just creak when it's about to rain. Sold out of burritos early today, so I'm in a good mood. Some high school kid even gave me a banana milk and told me to keep up the good work." Mark got close to the phone and said, "Aunt Betty, don't save that milk. Drink it right now." All right. You two take it easy on the overtime. If you work yourselves to the bone hoarding money, you'll just end up leaving it for someone else to spend." Before hanging up, she explicitly ordered me not to skip meals. It was her usual warm voice, with absolutely no warning of the horrible tragedy to come. When I called the following Sunday, her phone was off. Monday and Tuesday passed, and we still couldn't reach her. I tried calling her next-door neighbor, but the woman only said Aunt Betty's door was locked and she hadn't seen her. By the second week, unable to take it anymore, Mark called Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob cut him off as if he had been waiting. "Betty? She sold her house and moved out of state. Said not to look for her. She specifically asked not to be bothered by anyone." Mark asked urgently, "Where did she move? Just tell me the city." "How should I know? A grown woman left on her own 2 feet. Just because you made a few bucks, you think you can dictate an elder's life now?" I took the phone from my husband. "Uncle Bob, then who did she sell the house to? I want to ask the buyer." After a beat of silence, Uncle Bob snapped. "She said she doesn't want to see you. Why are you interrogating me? She went to find her own way to live, so mind your own business." The call disconnected. For nearly 3 months after that, we hired private investigators to search the Ohio town and surrounding areas. Some said she skipped town. Others said they thought they saw an old lady selling burritos near the old downtown bus terminal. But no clear address turned up. Late one night in late May, Mark tossed his phone on the table. "Uncle Bob is definitely hiding something." I pulled out the old cloth bag from the bottom of my closet. If we roll up in a luxury car wearing nice clothes, Uncle Bob will just invent another elaborate lie. The next morning, I temporarily delegated most of my authority to my secretary, Miss Carter. Mark pulled out a frayed shirt with a worn-out collar, and I put on old sneakers with worn-down soles. It was the exact same outfit we wore 6 years ago when we fled our hometown like beggars. We weren't going back for money or revenge. We were going back to find the only savior who had opened a path for us to live. Sitting in the very back corner of the Greyhound bus heading to Ohio, I pulled my hat down low and stared out the window. Mark stared blankly ahead, his eyes wide open, all the way through Indiana. In my old cloth bag, I had 2 crumpled changes of clothes, a cracked old smartphone, and a few crumpled $20 bills. But sewn securely into the bottom lining were our corporate credit cards, our lawyer's contact info, and crucial legal documents. We had strictly agreed beforehand not to let anyone in town know our true identities. Mark whispered. Are we taking this act too far? You mean pretending to be broke? Yeah, they're wearing masks too, anyway. We're not going down there to beg for money or lay a trap. We're doing this because if they find out we're rich, they might bury the truth about Aunt Betty forever. Mark was silent for a long time before saying, I just pray she's okay. I prayed desperately, too. But the sharp, defensive tone in Uncle Bob's voice kept gnawing at my nerves. A person with nothing to hide wouldn't get angry and hang up when asked about his own sister's whereabouts. Around 2 p.m., the bus stopped at the local station. The early June Ohio sun was suffocatingly hot, and the heat radiating from the asphalt felt like it was melting the soles of my old sneakers. I tied my hair up messily, and Mark slumped his shoulders as he carried the bag. From a distance, we looked exactly like the defeated couple who had been chased away by debt 6 years ago. At the gazebo by the town entrance, some local women were eating watermelon and fanning themselves. One woman, Mrs. Higgins, narrowed her eyes at us and slapped her knee. Oh my lord, ain't that Sarah and Mark? Mark approached with his head down. Yes, hello. Long time no see. Mrs. Higgins looked us up and down from head to toe. I heard you went down south, started a huge business, and were living large. Why do you look like a train wreck? I answered in a fading voice. The economy is just so bad right now. Business is really tough. A man sitting on the bench clicked his tongue. Went totally bankrupt again, huh? Once a loser, always a loser, no matter where they go. Before we even turned the corner past the gazebo, the sound of their gossip hit our ears. Small-town gossip was faster than the internet. As we passed the first street, a woman drying peppers in her yard made eye contact with us, then immediately slammed her gate shut, terrified we might ask for a loan. Mark smiled bitterly. We didn't even say hello, but our clothes and bags did all the talking. When we arrived at Uncle Bob's house, the paved driveway gleamed, and a mountain of sand and cement bags was piled in the adjacent empty lot. A shiny new sign hanging over the gate read, Tyler's Hardware and Supply. Mark rang the doorbell, and Uncle Bob walked out slowly, wearing a short-sleeved polo shirt. A thick gold chain glinted around his thick neck. Spotting us, Uncle Bob stopped dead in his tracks, keeping the gate locked. What are you doing here? It was a hostile greeting, but Mark nodded respectfully. Hello, Uncle Bob. We came looking for Aunt Betty. Uncle Bob jerked his chin up without unlocking the gate. She's not here. Then please, just tell me what address she moved to. I told you last time I don't know. I stepped forward. We came a long way and we're so thirsty. Could we just come in for a glass of water and talk for a minute? Just then, Aunt Linda walked out to the yard. She scanned Mark's bag and my shabby clothes, then snorted. Tomorrow is the annual Jenkins family reunion. The whole family is busy beyond belief. We don't have time to entertain bankrupt deadbeats like you. If you smelled money and came to beg, dream on. Mark replied, We're not here to ask for money. We just want to know how Aunt Betty is doing, and then we'll leave. If you won't tell us, just let us sleep in the corner of the yard tonight. Aunt Linda laughed in disbelief. You think our house is a homeless shelter? You don't show your faces for 6 years, never call when you're doing fine, and now that you're broke with nowhere to go, you barge in here? I suppressed my anger and spoke calmly. For the last 6 years, we sent money and gifts for the family holidays without fail. You're being harsh just because we want to ask about Aunt Betty, Uncle Bob frowned. Are you two here because you heard about the family estate land? Are you here to claim a piece of it? Mark looked up sharply. Land? What are you talking about? Uncle Bob looked away as if he had misspoken. Nothing. Betty sold her house and left, so if you're so curious, go ask the guy who bought it. Just then, Cousin Tyler pulled into the alley in a massive black pickup truck. He rolled down his window, glanced at us, and scoffed. "Oh, the big shot CEO from the city has arrived." Mark suppressed his emotions. "Hi, Tyler." Tyler got out and patted the hood of his truck. "How do you like it? Dropped $80K on it last month. This is the scale you gotta run a business at. That's why losers with nothing collapse when they pull other people's money to expand." I bowed my head slightly. Congratulations on the new truck. Tyler stepped closer, lifting his chin. "You won't get anything out of my aunt. The last time you went bankrupt, she emptied her bank accounts for you. She's broke now. Visiting her is a waste of time." Mark asked sharply, "You know where she is, don't you, Tyler?" Tyler flinched and looked at Uncle Bob. "Dad, you haven't told them yet?" Uncle Bob yelled. "Why are you getting involved in family business? Go inside." Through the crack in the slightly open gate, I noticed a blue legal folder sitting on a patio table. The top page had bold letters printed on it, "Waiver of Inheritance Rights," and in the corner, the name Tyler Jenkins was typed. Tyler quickly slammed the gate shut and spat out. "If you don't have a place to sleep, go to the YMCA shelter downtown. Don't hover around a working man's house. It's bad luck." We turned around without arguing further. The next two relatives we visited were the ones who had borrowed money from us in the past. We didn't mention the debts at all. We only asked about Aunt Betty. One flat out denied knowing anything, and the other mumbled that she heard. Betty moved out of state with a friend but couldn't remember which one. It sounded rehearsed. Finally, we went to Aunt Betty's small rented trailer at the edge of town. The patio table and coolers were nowhere to be found, and a new nameplate was on the door. A middle-aged man opened it. "Do you happen to know where the older woman who lived here went? I bought this place almost 3 months ago. The lady was in such a rush, she sold it way under market value. Did she tell you why she was moving?" "She said she desperately needed money for hospital bills and surgery." My heart plummeted to the floor. The elderly woman next door, leaning on a cane, approached us. She was a lady who used to sell vegetables near Aunt Betty's food cart. She saw Mark and clicked her tongue. "Oh Lord, you're Betty's nephew, ain't ya? Why'd you come down so late?" Mark grabbed her hand. "Ma'am, what happened to my aunt?" The old woman glanced nervously toward Uncle Bob's neighborhood and lowered her voice. "Hit and run. Got hit by a motorcycle and her leg bone snapped. But she had no money for the hospital. She called all her relatives, and nobody showed their face. So she ended up selling her house and got chased into a slum room behind the old bus terminal." Mark froze like he had been struck by a hammer. His face went stark white, and his trembling lips couldn't produce a sound. I clenched my fists. In the 3 months we hadn't been in touch, Aunt Betty had lost her house, lost her health, and been completely abandoned. Thinking about Uncle Bob calmly lying to us that she had moved out of state sent a chill down my spine. As soon as the old woman finished, Mark asked urgently, "Ma'am, do you remember the exact date she got in the accident?" "Well, maybe mid-March. She was pulling her cart out early in the morning to sell food, and some crazy bastard hit her and ran. The other vendors called 911, and she was taken to the local hospital." "Did any family show up at the hospital?" "Her brother Bob came once. But they just yelled and screamed at each other in the hallway, and after that, he never came back." We thanked the old woman profusely and ran to the local hospital. "Get it together, Mark. We need to check the medical records right now. I thought Aunt Betty was mad at me, and that's why she wasn't answering." "I'm a complete idiot," Mark blamed himself, wiping away tears. At the hospital, Mark submitted his ID and proof of relation, accessing the records as her guardian. The clerk looked at the monitor and said, "The patient, Betty Jenkins, came into the ER on March 10th. She was diagnosed with a fractured right femur and hip joint damage. 2 days later, due to equipment issues, she was transferred to the larger general hospital downtown. Is there a guardian's contact number on file?" The clerk typed for a moment. "Yes, her brother, Robert Jenkins, is registered." Mark and I looked at each other. Uncle Bob knew perfectly well that Aunt Betty had been in an accident, yet he hid it from us completely. We headed straight to the general hospital downtown. After waiting nearly an hour, we managed to speak with the head nurse who had been in charge of the ward. She looked at a photo on my phone and nodded. "Oh, I remember this lady. She broke my heart because she asked me every single day if there was a cheaper way to do the surgery. Mark swallowed hard. Did the surgery go well? The nurse sighed. She needed hip joint surgery, but her family wouldn't put down the deposit or sign as guarantors. No family came to the hospital? The nurse hesitated. A middle-aged man, claiming to be her brother, came once, but he brought a stack of papers. He told her if she signed them, he'd pay for the surgery, and if she didn't, he had no money either. They had a huge argument at the end of the hall. Did you hear what they were fighting about? The old lady was crying her eyes out, screaming that even if she ended up a cripple for the rest of her life, she would never sign over the family land. The man got mad and just left. Mark turned his head toward the hallway window. His jaw trembled violently. The nurse continued. A few days later, she forced a discharge. She must have sold her house, because she brought in some cash and barely settled her outstanding room fees. The doctor begged her to stay on bed rest, but she insisted on leaving on crutches. How did she leave? The lady from the diner across the street called her a cab. She was just skin and bones. We ran to the diner across the street. The owner recognized Aunt Betty's face immediately. Oh my God, the burrito lady. It's a tragedy. Even with her leg busted, she said her 2 hands were fine, so she had to keep rolling burritos to survive. Packed up all her stuff and left. Do you know where she went? I heard she went to the slums behind the old auto shop near the old bus terminal. We took a taxi to the old terminal. It used to be busy, but the businesses had all died out, leaving only an old auto shop and a shantytown of tin-roofed shacks. In an alley suffocating with the smell of motor oil, exhaust, and sewage, we searched like maniacs. We showed her picture to an old woman selling vegetables, a delivery driver, and a diner owner, asking over and over. Around 6 p.m., a kid selling lottery tickets nodded and pointed down the alley. Oh, the lady with the hurt leg who gives me leftover burritos at night. She lives all the way at the end, under the blue tarp on the roof. When we reached the end of the alley, we saw 2 faded coolers sitting under a blue tarp. Next to them, a charcoal grill was barely keeping embers alive, and an old woman with pure white hair, dragging a crippled leg, was struggling to pack burritos into styrofoam containers. Her right leg didn't have a cast. It was just heavily wrapped in dirty bandages. Every time she shifted her weight, she winced and leaned on a battered wooden cane. Mark froze like a stone statue. The sound that escaped his lips was closer to a breath than a word. Aunt Betty. The old woman snapped her head up. The bottle of oil in her hand dropped to the ground. She rubbed her eyes and rubbed them again. She leaned on her cane and tried to stand up frantically, but slipped and collapsed onto the dirt. Mark howled like a wounded animal and ran to her, throwing his arms around her. Aunt Betty. Aunt Betty. Aunt Betty grabbed Mark by the shoulders and stroked his face over and over. My Mark? Is it really my nephew Mark? Her voice was cracked and shaking terribly. But a moment later, her eyes landed on my shabby clothes and Mark's pathetic cloth bag. Sarah's here too. But why do you look like this? Did something happen to the company again? I bit my lip hard and nodded. Things just haven't been working out lately, Aunt Betty. She didn't ask a single question about the $45,000 she had given us 6 years ago. Her very first action was to pick up the dropped bottle and open the cooler in the corner. Did you eat? You want an Aunt Betty burrito? Mark grabbed her rough hands tightly. Aunt Betty, your leg is like this, and you're out here selling these? If I don't sell 'em, where do I get the rent money? My legs broke, but my wrists still work fine. She forced a smile, but her lips contorted in pain. There were exactly 2 burritos left in the cooler. She scraped together the remaining scrambled eggs and sausage, piling them high on 2 styrofoam plates, and pushed them toward us. Eat. They taste bad when they get cold. The burritos placed in front of me were packed full, but Aunt Betty's old chipped bowl only had the scorched crusts of rice left at the bottom. Mark wiped his tears with his sleeve and asked, Where's your room? Let's go inside. Aunt Betty pointed to a shack beneath the stairs of a rooftop. It was barely 50 square feet, made of plywood, and Mark had to duck his head completely, just to get in. Inside was a rusty fan, a kerosene heater, and some clothes stuffed in a corner. Next to her water cup lay a cheap painkiller wrapper, and the appointment card for the General Hospital outpatient clinic was already a month past due. I sat down next to her. Aunt Betty, whatever it took, you should have contacted us. Why did you believe Uncle Bob when he lied? and said we were running from debt. She was silent for a long time before answering. Your Uncle Bob told me. He said your company went bankrupt again and you were running from debt collectors. He told me if you guys ever called me, the police could track the location and arrest you. Told me to never contact you. And my phone got smashed when the motorcycle hit me and I lost the notebook with your numbers in it. Mark's voice cracked. Uncle Bob told us you moved out of state and told us not to look for you. Aunt Betty lifted her head sharply. I never said a damn word like that. A chill ran down my spine again. Uncle Bob had targeted both of our most fatal vulnerabilities. He planted the fear in Aunt Betty that her nephew could be in danger. And he planted the feeling of betrayal in us, that she had abandoned us, perfectly severing our connection. But what drove me the most crazy in that moment wasn't that malicious plot. It was her blinding, unconditional love, that even while surviving in a boiling hot shack with a broken leg, popping over-the-counter pills, her first instinct was to try and feed her worthless nephew one more bite of food. Aunt Betty placed the burritos on a small plastic folding table. Both Mark's and my plates were loaded with meat and eggs, while her bowl remained pathetic. Aunt Betty, you eat this. You haven't had anything all day. I pushed the food away. She forced a laugh. When you smell food all day, you lose your appetite. Just eat. Mark grabbed all the eggs off his plate and dumped them into her bowl. If you don't eat. A grown man throwing a tantrum. She scowled playfully, but reluctantly put the eggs in her mouth, while subtly pushing the meat back onto Mark's plate. Before I even swallowed my food, I picked up the appointment card. This appointment was a month ago. Why didn't you go to the hospital? It costs money to take a cab, and if I chew on the leftover painkillers, it's bearable. I shook the pill bottle. There were barely 2 white pills left. You can't even walk. How is this bearable? Mark sat close to her. Aunt Betty. That stack of papers Uncle Bob brought to the hospital. What was it? Her hands flinched. I chimed in. We heard everything from the nurse. Please, don't hide it from us. Aunt Betty let out a deep sigh. That 150-acre farm plot behind the family estate. Tyler says he needs that land to build a road connecting the back of his hardware store. Said he just needed me to sign a paper letting him manage it. Did you read the document yourself? I don't read so well, but I clearly saw the words, permanent waiver, on the front page. If I sign that, the estate, the land, everything, my share is completely gone. So they refused to pay for your surgery and left you? Mark's fists shook uncontrollably. Aunt Betty frantically waved her hands. No, don't be too hard on him. Bob probably couldn't find the cash either. Mark yelled, you broke your leg and had to sell your house. But Uncle Bob walks around in a gold chain living in a 3-story mansion. And you think he couldn't find the money? Aunt Betty, how long are you going to just sit there and take this? She turned her head away. We share the same parents. We're blood. I don't want to curse my own brother where people can hear. Let it go. Just then, the sound of a car engine echoed outside the alley, and sharp headlights pierced through the blue tarp. Cousin Tyler didn't even come into the room. He stood outside the tarp, holding his nose, shifting his weight onto one leg. Hey Mark, tomorrow's the family reunion barbecue. Dad says both you and Aunt Betty need to show up. Aunt Betty replied coldly. I remember my own father's memory. You don't need to order me around. Tyler pulled a blue folder out of his suit jacket and waved it in the air. Once you finish eating, stop stalling and sign this. I need to file this at the county clerk's office tomorrow. My business is stalled because you keep being stubborn. What do you expect me to do? Mark kicked the door open and blocked Tyler's path. Let me read what's in that folder first. Tyler sneered and hid the folder behind his back. What right do you have? You went bankrupt and ran away in the middle of the night 6 years ago. Don't act like family now. I asked. If it's just a family reunion barbecue, we can just attend the barbecue. Why do you need her ID and notarized signature? Tyler ignored me and scanned the room. Seeing a crumpled wad of bills in an old tin can on the table, he clicked his tongue. Sitting on that pathetic amount of cash, you should have just gotten the surgery. Why are you giving it away to your broke nephew again? Don't come crying to me later when you have no money. With that, Tyler got back in his truck and aggressively peeled out of the alley. Aunt Betty looked at us with anxious eyes. Don't go tomorrow. I'll go by myself, pay my respects, and come right back. Mark pulled up a chair to face her. You are my grandpa's own daughter, and I am my father's rightful heir. No one has the right to kick us out of that family. I placed my hand over the old tin can. Aunt Betty, you don't need to sign any documents tomorrow. Just stand tall and proud in honor of our folks. We will handle the rest. Aunt Betty looked at our worn clothes, completely unable to understand where we were getting this confidence. Remembering the snippet of the document Tyler had flashed, I realized they had set an elaborate trap using the family reunion as bait. Before sunrise the next day, Mark drew a rough map of the property on a napkin based on what he had seen of the document. The estate is 400 acres total. The main house and yard are in the center, and the farm stretches out back behind Tyler's hardware store. I took a picture of the drawing with my smartphone. Mark divided it into 3 sections. Grandpa and Grandma had 4 kids. Uncle Bob, my dad, an aunt who died young with no kids, and Aunt Betty. By inheritance law, it splits between the remaining 3 lines. So, Uncle Bob gets a third, I get a third as my dad's heir, and Aunt Betty gets a third. All 3 parties have to agree and sign off to sell the land or build a road. Aunt Betty messaged Herley and Sahil. In the old days, the folks just verbally agreed. The eldest son manages the estate and hosts the reunions. We never formally divided it through probate. Mark spoke firmly. Just because it's not divided on paper doesn't mean Uncle Bob can sell it off however he wants. That's exactly why he needs your signature and notary stamp. Aunt Betty stared blankly at the calendar on the wall. The paper Tyler shoved at me. I couldn't read the whole thing, but the spot on the back for my social security number and notary stamp was blank. Mark slammed the table. That wasn't a management consent form. It's a waiver of inheritance. The second you sign that, the house, the fields, everything, your share becomes 0. I took my old phone and walked outside. The number wasn't saved in the contacts, but I dialed the number I had perfectly memorized. It was Miss Carter, the executive secretary of Apex Naturals. As soon as it rang, she answered urgently. Miss Jenkins, did you find your aunt? We found her. She was in a hit and run, and broke her femur. But she still hasn't had surgery. On top of that, her older brother's side is forcing her to sign away her inheritance. Miss Carter's voice instantly shifted to a cold, rational business tone. If you have photos of the documents, please send them to the secure server immediately. Mr. Hayes is on standby at the law firm in Chicago. Bring a corporate security team of 6, and you and Mr. Hayes fly down to Ohio immediately. But do not bring the 3 vehicles into the town. Wait at the outskirts. Have the security wear civilian clothes, nothing intimidating. Only step in if there's physical violence, but absolutely do not interfere in a verbal family argument. Understood. 20 minutes. After hanging up, Mr. Hayes, from our corporate law firm, called me. Miss Jenkins, I've reviewed the photos. The document is disguised as a deed of relinquishment, but practically, it's fraud intended to zero out Betty's share. However, since her signature isn't on it yet, it has no legal effect. Can you freeze all transactions on that land immediately? I will file an injunction prohibiting the disposal of the real estate and send certified letters to the county clerk and local notary offices. However, until the court order comes down, it's not strictly binding, so you absolutely must not let her sign that document on site. Get it done this morning. I have copies of Aunt Betty's probate records and deeds. Perfect. Miss Carter and I are on our way. After hanging up, I called my father in West Virginia. I briefly explained the situation. My father was silent for a long time before speaking heavily. Are you planning to flip the tables and make a mess? We're going to expose Uncle Bob's true face in front of the whole town. Exposing them is fine, but do not wave your money around to intimidate or humiliate people. If you crush them with money, they'll stop being the abusers and start playing the victims. Remember that. I'll keep that in mind, Dad. And never forget, the reason you went back wasn't for revenge for 6 years ago, but to protect that poor old woman. Keep your head cold. Fight paper with paper. My father's words poured cold water on my boiling rage. I realized that if I let myself be blinded by a 6-year-old grudge, today wouldn't be about saving Aunt Betty. It would devolve into a bloody revenge drama. Aunt Betty pulled out an old, frayed Sunday dress from deep inside her closet. I brushed her messy white hair and pinned it neatly. She brushed off my offer to call a taxi. If we show up in a stranger's car, the townspeople will just gossip more. Let's walk. Instead of her crutches, we gave her a sturdy wooden cane, and Mark and I supported her on either side. It was a long walk from the slums to Uncle Bob's house, and Aunt Betty's swollen leg made every step agonizing, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Uncle Bob's yard was covered by a massive tent, and over 20 tables were set up for the townspeople and relatives. The noise was deafening, the smell of barbecue ribs and baked beans mixing with the smoke. No one inside the yard knew that 3 black SUVs were waiting just outside the town limits. Uncle Bob, wearing a white button-down shirt and a tie, was weaving between the tables, laughing loudly. "Eat up, everybody. This is how the eldest son of the family hosts a party." The townspeople were busy praising him for honoring the folks so well. His eyes were full of arrogance and self-satisfaction. Mark and I helped Aunt Betty through the gate and toward the memory table set up on the porch. It was decorated with Grandpa and Grandma's photos and a few of their favorite things. Aunt Betty leaned her cane against the wall and lit a remembrance candle with trembling hands. "Mom, Dad, your youngest daughter finally made it. My leg ain't so good." Uncle Bob stood nearby and cleared his throat loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Honoring our folks requires responsibility. What's the point of just calling yourself a good daughter? The one breaking his back, setting the tables, and paying for everything is the eldest son," Mark said quietly beside him. "My wife and I wired you money for the reunion costs every single holiday for the last 6 years." Uncle Bob scoffed. "Sending a few bucks from out of state makes you a big shot? Coming here without even washing the dishes." Aunt Betty placed the candle down and spoke softly. "Let's not calculate our love for our parents with money today, Bob. The ones who are gone know exactly who the real family is." Uncle Bob's face turned purple, but he pretended not to care and walked away to greet guests. After paying our respects, we stepped down into the yard. Everyone's eyes instantly locked onto Aunt Betty's heavily bandaged leg, but not a single person pulled out a chair or came to help her. Aunt Linda walked out, carrying a tray, saw us, and frowned. "Oh, you finally showed up. Just in time to eat and leave the dishes to us." Aunt Betty replied, "I walk slow." But I wasn't late to pay my respects. Aunt Linda looked at our ragged clothes and pointed. "The tables are full. Go sit in the corner." The place she pointed to was a broken plastic table propped up by a brick, right next to the drainage ditch. The table was littered with gnawed rib bones, dried-out potato salad, and cold food. Right next to it, women were washing dishes at the pump, dirty water pouring down the drain. I blocked Aunt Linda. "Aunt Linda, her leg is broken. Next to the drain is a bit much. Please make a spot for her on the porch." Aunt Linda snorted. "The porch is for the elders and the town mayor. You're here to freeload. Why do you care where you sit?" I pulled Aunt Betty's sleeve. "Hold it in, Sarah. As long as I'm near my parents, sitting next to the drain is fine." Mark silently brought over a rag, wiped down the plastic table, and adjusted the brick so the table wouldn't wobble. He then brought a plate of fresh, tender chicken breast from another table and placed it in front of Aunt Betty. A young guy from town sitting at the next table sneered. "Hey, Mark, ain't you the guy they said was a big-shot CEO down south? Crawling back here flat broke like it never happened." Another man snickered. "A guy who goes bankrupt once, goes bankrupt twice in a heartbeat." I said nothing. Mark just focused on cutting up the meat for his aunt. Right then, Tyler walked out of the house wearing a tailored suit, carrying the blue legal folder. He stood next to our table, shifting his weight. "You done eating? Stop stalling and put your signature here. I need to file this at the county clerk's office tomorrow morning." Aunt Betty set her fork down. "I told you I'm not signing." Tyler slammed the folder onto the table. The flimsy plastic table shook, spilling cold soup from the bowls. "Look, lady, I know you can't read so you don't understand, but this is a consent form to build a road on the farm. What good is hoarding land when you're too old to work it? It's just sitting there growing weeds." Mark swiftly snatched the folder and flipped to the last page. "Tyler, this isn't a management consent form. It says right here, permanently waives all rights and interests to the entirety of the inherited estate. You're committing fraud." Tyler panicked and tried to snatch the folder back. "What does our family business have to do with you?" Mark grabbed Tyler's wrist hard. "I am my grandpa's flesh and blood grandson. I have the right to sign as an heir too." Hearing the commotion, Uncle Bob stomped over. "You cut off contact for 6 years, and now you want to play the blood card? The family estate is managed by the eldest son. That's our family tradition. Betty is alone anyway. She doesn't even have kids to pass it to." Aunt Betty leaned on her cane and struggled to her feet. My share is mine until the day I die. Whether I plow the field or dig my own grave on it later, it's my choice. I'm still breathing, and you're trying to blind me and steal my land? The murmuring from the townspeople at the other tables suddenly stopped. All eyes turned to our table. Aunt Linda threw an envelope filled with a few crisp $50 bills onto the table. Here, $500. Buy some medicine. That's enough to get you to sign, right? Guarding that land with a broken leg won't feed you. Aunt Betty used the tip of her cane to shove the envelope off the table. I may be poor, but I don't sell my name. Tyler's face flushed bright red, and he pointed his finger. Have you lost your damn mind, old woman? You sell hot dogs for a living? And you think you can stand up to the head of the family? Mark's voice was low but lethal. Watch your mouth, Tyler scoffed. Watch my mouth? You dragging a cripple from the slums in here to play the dutiful nephew. Is this fun for you? Aunt Betty was shaking violently as she spoke. I was hit by a hit-and-run driver and broke my leg. I wasn't struck by lightning for scamming people. Enraged, Tyler suddenly kicked the leg of our flimsy plastic table. The brick flew out, and the table crashed upside down. Hot soup, bones, and dirty dishwater splashed all over Aunt Betty's pants and shoes. Ah, Aunt Linda screamed dramatically. Oh my God, you're ruining the family barbecue. Clean it up right now. Seeing the overturned plates, I felt the blood rush to my head. Aunt Betty's hands gripped her cane, trembling. Perhaps out of a deep-seated habit of poverty and being looked down upon, she reflexively bent down to pick up the broken plates. I grabbed her arm firmly. Aunt Betty, don't bend down. You have no reason to bow your head to anyone here. I stood her up straight, had Mark support her, and walked right up to Uncle Bob, Robert Jenkins. Uncle Bob's eyes went wide. Have you completely lost your mind? I ignored him and spoke clearly and sharply. 6 years ago, when we went bankrupt, Aunt Betty gave us her entire life savings of $45,000, money she made selling burritos, plus her dead husband's life insurance. She didn't keep a single penny for herself. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Betty had that kind of money? People whispered. I pointed at Aunt Linda's envelope on the ground. And today, you throw $500 at your sister with a broken leg to steal her entire inheritance? On March 10th, when Aunt Betty was hit by a car and rushed to the ER, you signed as her guardian, didn't you? And then you ran away because you didn't want to pay for her surgery. Uncle Bob screamed, pointing his finger. Where are you making up these lies? I thought Betty stole money and ran off in the middle of the night. I pulled a copy of the medical records from my jacket pocket and waved it in the air. This is the official record, verified by the head nurse at the General Hospital. Guardian Robert Jenkins refused surgical consent and discharged patient. You lied to my husband, saying she moved out of state. And you lied to Betty, saying we were running from the cops so she shouldn't call us. Aunt Linda went pale and tried to cut in. Sarah, there seems to be a family misunderstanding. Let's go inside and talk quietly. Misunderstanding? She was left with crushed bones for 3 months. Is that a misunderstanding? Furious, Tyler grabbed an empty beer bottle from the next table and flipped it in his hand. You bitches trying to destroy our family? He raised the bottle and charged at me. Mark stepped in front of me, grabbing Tyler's wrist to twist it. Right then, I pressed the button on the radio transmitter in my pocket. Screech! From outside the gates, the sound of tires skidding echoed, and 2 black SUVs and a luxury sedan kicked up dust as they came to a halt. The doors flew open, and 6 massive security agents in black civilian clothes rushed into the yard in perfect formation. 2 of them instantly restrained Tyler's arms, pinning him down and knocking the bottle away. Calm down, sir. Physical violence is prohibited. They didn't raise their voices or throw punches, but they had Tyler completely immobilized. Behind them, Miss Carter, dressed in a sharp gray business suit, and Mr. Hayes, carrying a black leather briefcase, walked into the yard. Miss Carter's heels clicked as she approached me, standing with perfect professional posture and giving a firm nod. Miss Jenkins, I have brought all the documents you requested. The yard went as quiet as a graveyard. Aunt Linda's jaw dropped. Miss Jenkins? Miss Carter turned to the crowd and announced clearly. Currently, Sarah Jenkins is the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Naturals, a corporation with tens of millions in annual revenue. Mr. Mark Jenkins serves as the president. Mark unbuttoned his frayed collar and smiled coldly. If we hadn't come dressed in rags, Uncle Bob, you would have taken the secret of why you threw Aunt Betty away to your grave, wouldn't you? Mr. Hayes stepped forward and opened his briefcase. I am Mr. Hayes, lead counsel for Apex Naturals and the joint legal representative for Sarah, Mark, and Betty Jenkins. As of this moment, we have filed an injunction with the county court freezing the 400-acre estate, and we have formally notified the county clerk that the land is under an active inheritance dispute. Tyler Jenkins, your hardware store expansion is halted effectively immediately. Tyler glared up from the ground, screaming, "Are you guys insane? Who the hell are you to block my business?" I took 2 thick binders from Miss Carter and dropped them onto a table. Robert Jenkins, Linda Jenkins, Tyler Jenkins. These are the IOUs and total amounts of the money you borrowed from us before we went bankrupt 6 years ago. I opened the first folder. Uncle Bob, $35,000 for your house remodel and building materials. Aunt Linda, $8,000 for your MLM health supplement business. Tyler, $10,000 to help buy your first truck. Add in all the little bits you nickel and dimed from us, and the principal alone is over $55,000. Aunt Linda panicked, waving her hands. That was just an allowance you gave us because you were rich. I pulled out printed screenshots of text messages. I have the texts right here, Uncle Bob. I'll pay you back with interest in 3 months when the construction money comes in. Since when do you write IOUs for an allowance? Uncle Bob slumped into a chair. Mr. Hayes added coldly, all promissory notes and digital evidence are fully legally binding. As of this hour, we are issuing a notice of default and will immediately begin debt collection proceedings. Tyler, your business loan extension won't be approved by any bank while you're embroiled in a massive inheritance lawsuit. Dad, what do I do? Tyler turned deathly pale, looking at Uncle Bob. I handed the folders back to Miss Carter. This $55,000 debt will be collected in full and donated entirely to a local emergency relief fund for seniors living alone and victims of hit-and-run accidents. Aunt Betty and Mr. Hayes will personally oversee the fund. Not a single penny of this will go into my pocket. The townspeople murmured, a mix of shock and vindication on their faces. Serves him right. Tried to throw away his own sister to steal the land and got what was coming to him. I handed a piece of paper to Uncle Bob, who was staring blankly. Sign this. It's a legal waiver promising you will never again oppress, threaten, or infringe upon Aunt Betty's inheritance rights. Tyler, sign the agreement that you will restore the farmland you illegally bulldozed to its original state. Whether you live in a penthouse or a slum, you treat your blood like blood. Uncle Bob, hands shaking uncontrollably, gripped the pen and scribbled his signature. Tyler, head bowed, did the same. Mark spoke one last time. Uncle Bob, do you have anything to say? Uncle Bob bit his lip, then reluctantly lowered his head. Betty, I'm sorry. I did something a brother should never do. Aunt Linda apologized in a tiny voice. I'm sorry I splashed dirty water on you. Aunt Betty, leaning heavily on her cane, looked down at them quietly. You don't need to force yourselves to apologize to me. I don't need money or glory. I am just satisfied that I kept my right to stand proudly and pay my respects to our folks. After the barbecue ended and everyone had cleared out, we took Aunt Betty up to a top orthopedic hospital in Chicago. On the private flight, she kept clutching her ID card, worrying incessantly. Sarah, how much does a plane like this cost? The surgery is going to be so expensive. Aunt Betty, don't worry about a single penny. Just focus on getting the surgery and rehabbing so you can walk again. Performed by a renowned joint specialist, her hip replacement was a complete success. Waiting outside the OR for 3 agonizing hours, when the doctor came out and said, "The procedure went beautifully," Mark and I collapsed to the floor and sobbed. We bought a beautiful, cozy $400,000 house in the Chicago suburbs with a yard, entirely in Aunt Betty's name. We installed non-slip tiles and safety rails in the bathrooms, and removed all the thresholds in the house. We planted the tomatoes and peppers she always wanted to grow in the backyard. Then, we handed her a $1 million dividend trust agreement that guaranteed her a 4% annual payout from Apex Naturals' net profits for the rest of her life. Aunt Betty freaked out and threw the pen across the room. I gave you $45,000. Why are you dropping a mountain of gold on my head? I will never take this. Mark knelt down beside her chair. Aunt Betty, 6 years ago when I broke down on your floor, you scolded me for throwing away my pride as a man. Today, I'm throwing away all my pride to beg you to let us repay your kindness. I held her calloused hands tight. This isn't charity. You were our very first investor 6 years ago. You are receiving your rightful dividends. If you don't want to spend it, donate it to people who are sick and have no money. Tears streamed down her face, and eventually, she signed the document. A year later, Aunt Betty still walked with a slight limp, but she was recovered enough to walk without a cane. She opened a small diner near the hospital district in Chicago. The sign read, 3 a.m. burritos. It was the name Mark gave it to honor the heart of a woman who woke up at 3 a.m. for 20 years. Every morning, the diner gave away 60 free, warm burritos to cancer patients' families and people struggling to afford a meal. Aunt Betty no longer sweated over a hot grill all day. She hired 3 employees and just taste tested the food to make sure the seasoning was right. One weekend, Mark rolled up his sleeves and was washing dishes in the back when Aunt Betty slapped his back and yelled, "You're a president with over 200 employees, and you're back here scrubbing plates. Have you got no shame?" Mark laughed out loud. "At the company, I'm the president. Here, I'm just your busboy. Aunt Betty, I gotta do what I'm told." The whole kitchen erupted in laughter. That Thanksgiving, we took Aunt Betty down to my parents' house in West Virginia. My mother set a table so full it looked like the legs would snap. Smoked turkey, honey-baked ham, green bean casserole, and sweet potato pie. My father brought out his prized, locally distilled bourbon. He filled her glass and said, "In this house, we don't care about whose side of the family is whose. Anyone who loves and saves my kids is family." Aunt Betty wiped her eyes and took the glass. "Thanks to you raising such a wonderful daughter, Arthur, my foolish nephew Mark, gets to live like a real man." There were no expensive chandeliers or luxury goods in that Appalachian farmhouse, but no one had to sit next to a drain, and no one ranked you by how much money you had. Back in Ohio, Uncle Bob lost all respect in the community and was stripped of his status as the head of the family estate. Tyler couldn't handle the interest rates and the stalled construction, so he sold his prized truck for half its value and ended up running from debt collectors. Aunt Linda said she was so embarrassed she couldn't even go to the local grocery store. I believe that true justice isn't about burning with revenge and trampling your enemies into the dirt. True justice is lifting a good person who lost their place in the world back up into the warm, blinding sunlight. Whenever I see Aunt Betty smiling brightly as she hands out free burritos at dawn, I realize something. A person can fall down and go broke countless times in their life. But as long as you have people who believe in you, and even just one person whose kindness you never forget, you can always stand back up. Please, do not judge a person's worth by the clothes they wear. And please, never forget the person who took off their own coat to cover you when you were at your coldest.